Well, hello and good evening. Good, I can see my mic is working. I realise I hadn't fully tested everything beforehand. Beforehand? Yeah. Um, before dogs. Hi, hello, welcome. I'm Sam and you are listening to Chilliteracy, where the exciting combination of am very tired and also I haven't done this apparently for like a month or something. I don't know. It's been a while and things, as you know, as I say, like we do. Oh, good grief! It's all coming in. Right, hi. We do like well, I do generally one stream a week here, and so if something happens to come up on that one day where I'm like unwell or am away somewhere, then that means it's now 2 weeks since I streamed, and if you hit a bit of a run, then weeks go by without a stream, and then suddenly I forget everything that I meant to do when I come back here. But hello, yes, hi, welcome in. Okay, right, okay, fine. You're reminding me. I'll do the do the subreads. Parola, thank you for the 31 months. Yeah, it's again Twitch is doing a thing of showing me two different numbers. Thank you. Greetings. Thank you for the 31 months. Squirrel, thank you for the 19 months. And Andy Pants, thank you for the 39 months. Yay, books. Hi. Yes, good time zone, everybody. Nice lightning animation, thank you. It has always been that way for subs. Frankly, it gives me anxiety if we ever have to add some other kind of seasonal decorations. We have regular, we have Halloween, and we have Christmas. Because just to like completely ruin the magic behind it, it's actually like a completely redrawn scene with the lighting, and when it fires, it like pops essentially like a new image over the top in the overlay. But what it looks like is a streak of lightning outside. All the like animation work was done by Lucy. Well, the specifically like the lighting change for the flash of lightning was done by me, like redrawing over the top of it, and then hooking that up in the overlay. What are the bits on the stack of books? That, I would guess, is like a mince pie and some crumbs. Because it is Christmas, and it is tradition to eat a mince pie. Your next question, there's a 50-50 chance you're about to ask, what's a mince pie, Sam? We can discuss that. If you so choose, if you so desire. But yeah. Hi, hello everybody, welcome. Yeah, I'm just repeating myself, but I'm tired. That's not a fake yawn, that's a real yawn. Come on down to real fake yawns. We've got all kinds, we've got the big one, and just as we've got sighing and exasperation as well. If you remember correctly, mince pies do not actually involve mince. No, they involve mincemeat, which is even more confusingly named. What it is it's mincemeat, obviously. It's like fruit in a sort of sticky, sugary, I guess, mixture. And you can put like chopped nuts and stuff in there as well. This problem is, as soon as I start saying what it is, guaranteed there's going to be someone going, no Sam, actually you shouldn't put that in mincemeat, or that's not how I make it, I do it differently. So it's one of those things, it's like, kind of an old traditional thing. Everyone's got their own ideas on it. You just go to the shop and buy a jar of the stuff. They did at some point have both fruit and meat, if you remember correctly. Yes, that sounds about right. I think I have heard similar things, probably most recently from watching like an old episode of Great British Bake Off or something. Used to involve actual mincemeat, but then they took out the meat and just didn't change the name. Cool. Yep, no, that sounds like us. But yeah, they are little, sort of, you make like frankly, a shorter pastry as you're willing to go. The more butter and lard, the better. Make that thing rich and crumbly. Like, hey, I don't know, maybe some of you like your men, I'm not sure, I'm not here to judge. And then you like fill it with this eponymous mincemeat. I'm probably using that word incorrectly. And yeah, it's basically it's a little kind of fruit pie, I guess. Um, Mince pie is not really a thing here, but you like to try one. I never used to like him as a kid because, well, I mean, I still have like the legacy of that in that I do not like fruitcake. It's just no, just like it's odd. It's not one for me. And mince pies kind of for me bear like similar sort of, I guess, similar genes. I was trying to like pick my way around how to say that without suddenly sounding like I'm start talking about like Christmas food eugenics, which we're not ready for that arc on this channel yet. You like good homemade fruitcake, store-bought stuff is never good. No, it's just not for me. Not a huge fan of fruit and baked goods. Sorry to see the reaction to what I said, but it's like if I start saying like, well, mince pies and fruitcake, they're obviously different things, but they share the same kind of heritage, and so I just don't like them. It starts sounding a little bit like the people that make me angry on the television. So yeah, origin is the word I'm looking for. Yeah, okay, let's go with that. I don't even know if they share the same origin. Yeah, like fruits and fruitcake is weird. You don't like it. I don't like the individual parts, like raisins, sultanas, cherries, things like that. I like. I like them sometimes, not all the time, but there's there's a time and a place for them, and just I don't know. There's always something just kind of slightly bitter and unpleasant to me about fruitcake. Maybe it's just that I've only ever had bad. Like if Lucy was here, which she's not, she's out and busy this evening. You'd be there going, no, you've just never had good fruitcake that's got to be filled with booze. It's just an excuse to eat rum and stuff. And I'm like, yeah, but then that presents its own set of problems that I don't particularly fancy. And so not to put her on blast while she's away and can't answer back. And there's a little bit of that in mince pies, but I feel like it's the buttery pastry casing. You're just eating butter, sugar, and flour that's been baked, and frankly, that's one of the cornerstones of society. So that does good work to balance out the occasional like bitterness of some of the fruit that's inside. So in answer to your question, that's what's on the stack of books on the image, most likely. So there you go. Fruitcake you don't touch, especially your mum's, as you swear that it's 90% alcohol. Yeah. Mince pies you don't love but will eat occasionally. For me, there's like a list of foods that where I'm going with this is Twiglets, which again probably won't mean anything to our friends across the pond. Twiglets are little, well, they look like twigs, is kind of the premise. They look like twigs. They're like kind of dry, hard, baked twigs. Couldn't tell you exactly what they're made of. Probably wheat. And they're coated in a Marmite like sort of yeast extract, which is just hella salty. And I don't know why people love them so much, except that if a bowl of them is put in front of me, I will eat one, go, yeah, not so sure, and then devour the rest of them. They are weirdly compelling snacking, and at times in the past, where I'm going with this, is mince pies have kind of fit into that same category for me of like, I'll eat it because it's got like sugar and butter and stuff, but I'm not really enjoying the whole experience, but I will just keep going. And I've gotten not better, but more comfortable just chugging through some mince pies. Your dad's friend's mum, my dad's friend's mum, it just starts to sound like Hot Fuzz. when Danny's like, oh yeah, no, that's and I can't think of the ones that he reels off, but it's just this person, this person, this person, his mate, that whole thing. Your dad's friend's mum makes homemade fruitcakes. You don't think they involve any alcohol, at least not so it tastes like it, but they're so good. Sorry, squirrel. It took you 3 tries to hear that as twigs rather than twinks, and your brain was trying hard to visualize what that would look like. That no shade, but I think that might be a you problem. I think do you need to log off for a bit? Do you need to like get off the internet for a minute? You remember Yasmin gave you some twiglets during the Longest Pony tour, or it looked, or if you looked them up, you said you didn't think you'd like them. Oh, okay. Yeah. They're weird. I think nationally we may have gotten past our obsession. I feel like there was 10 to 20 years ago, there was a point where if you were attending any kind of like a birthday party or some kind of gathering, any kind of like family social gathering, there would be multiple bags of twiglets getting opened and poured into bowls, and by and large they would go. We like couldn't get enough of them, and I think, yeah, they don't sound appetizing, at least in my description. No, and maybe I'm doing them dirty because I don't particularly like them, but I can't stop eating them as well. But no, they're not particularly appetizing, but they're really compelling. I think you might look them up and guess you wouldn't like them. But wait, Peroda, do you not eat like the? I mean, it's obviously a completely different flavour. But is it salmiakki, the salted licorice? Which is like a really like inane point of comparison. It's like, hey, but don't you eat this other food that's completely different? Yeah, probably do. So you know, you kind of like that, yeah, yeah. So well, I don't know. I was just thinking. I guess that's like the contrast. Yeah, you're used to that. Yeah, fair. So the contrast of like sweet and saltiness, whereas twiglets are just like salty and dry. Who thought of these two delicious flavours together? But Sam, dry is not a flavour. It can be. Hubris, hello, welcome. I'm talking about snacks, so try and wake myself up. You know, thinking I don't actually know how easily we'll get through both stories that I planned for tonight, because just clattering things with my water bottle. Don't mind me. I'm going to keep repeating until I fall asleep that I'm tired. Pretzel stays dry, that's why I don't like. You know what? Actually, that's a pretty good point of comparison. Yeah, they have. I think I would say kind of a similar flavor profile to pretzels. It is that like this is just dry kind of flavor to them. Yeah, that's actually a good shout. Came up because talking about Swedish snacks, and she wondered if you want to try some UK ones. Yeah, we like. I guess I wouldn't know what our outliers are, other than for like seeing when people from other countries look at British food, and usually though it's through the lens of like Scrandal or something, where we're deliberately taking the piss out of ourselves, and like, you know, showing just the driest, most recently frozen oven chips that have been reheated, and then a huge just dollop of bright green mushy peas on top. And we're laughing at how bad this is, and other people are like, oh, this looks awful. Why do the British people still eat like it's the Blitz? One, shut your mouth. Like, let's go into the... No, we're not going to go into the cultural reasons for that. But, yeah, like, actually what just snacks and things available in shops we have that would be unusual to people from other countries, I don't know. Didn't like small hard pretzels either because they taste dry, but the big soft ones are great. Hard pretzels with butter or cream cheese. That's what soft pretzels covered in cheese are good, but the little hard ones. I I'm almost with you there, except here, at least, and I'm assuming not exclusively here, you can get, I think the brand currently known as like Flips or something, which are like small kind of bite-sized dry baked pretzels, very salty, covered in chocolate. And you know what? Those are at like that flips the entire experience. Hence that clever naming. I've just got it. It like upends. I haven't given them free advertising except to mention them, talk about them, and say that I like them. The whole experience. You've had those. The coating makes them bearable. Yeah, like just on their own, just eating like dry baked salt. No, not a big fan. Put chocolate in the mix, and I'm there. Salt and chocolate. You don't like Jammy Dodgers? No. I don't want to say it too loud because I might just get chased out of the country, but I also don't actually like Jammy Dodgers. I think they're just very mid. The jam flavour is just so synthetic. It's just unpleasant, and the biscuit's like a weird texture. It either needs to be softer or firmer, but it's kind of both, and it's bad. They are turbo mid. They are not. They're just like no. Not a big Jammy Dodgers fan. We act like they're some great delicacy. They're not. They're like that's just nah. Covered pretzels are good. Also peanut butter filled pretzel for now. Ooh, yeah. The better version of Flips is it Pokey? Is that meant? Because it's written Pocky, and everyone when I first encountered it was like Pocky, right? And then the weebs come in and go, Pokey, actually. Baka. Oh, sorry, I read it as it's written. You had Jammy Dodgers, I find nothing fantastic. Exactly. Anyway, look, this is just chocolate chat now. I'm going... You talk about biscuits and chocolate and crunchy things, and, amongst yourselves, have fun. I'm actually going to read a story, because I've been sat here 20 minutes. It's called the O Short Like. Is it short O like mock by an actual Japanese person? Oh. So it is Pocky. Huh. I remember, like, years ago on forums, being like, no, you're saying it wrong, it's not Pocky. What? Have you even watched an anime? Ugh. I don't know. So, yeah, I'll defer to that. I'm going to read you all a story, if that's okay. Joey is asleep in his cube with his little leggies dangling out. It's adorable, and it's my treat that I get to see. He's probably going to interrupt things when he tries to go out. But yeah, if we're ready, if we're sitting comfortably, this will be the first of hopefully 2 stories tonight for you to enjoy. And this one, what is it? This is called Christmas Eve on a Haunted Hulk by Frank Cowper. I shall never forget that night as long as I live. It was during the Christmas vacation of 1879. I was staying with an old college friend who had lately been appointed the curate of a country parish and had asked me to come and cheer him up, since he could not get away at that time. As we drove along the straight country lane from the little wayside station, it forcibly struck me that a life in such a place must be dreary indeed. I have always been much influenced by local colour. Above all things, I am depressed by a dead level, and here was monotony with a vengeance. On each side of the low hedges, lichen-covered and wind-cropped, stretched bare fields, the absolute level of the horizon being only broken at intervals by some mournful tree that pointed like a decrepit finger-post towards the east, for all its western growth was nipped and blasted by the roaring southwest winds. An occasional black spot, dotted against the grey distance, marked by a hayrick or labourer's cottage, while some 2 miles ahead of us the stunted spire of my friend's church stood out against the wintry sky, amid the withered branches of a few ragged trees. On our right hand stretched dreary wastes of mud, interspersed here and there with firmer patches of land, but desolate and forlorn, cut off from all communication with the mainland by acres of mud and thin streaks of brown water. A few sea-birds were piping over the waste, and this was the only sound, except the grit of our own wheels and the steady step of the horse which broke the silence. "Not lively, is it?" said Jones, and I couldn't say it was. As we drove up street, as the inhabitants fondly called the small array of low houses which bordered the high road, I noticed the lacklustre expression of the few children and untidy women who were loitering about the doors of their houses. There was an old tumble-down inn, with a dilapidated signboard scarcely held up by its rickety ironwork, a daub of yellow and red paint, and a dingy streak of blue was supposed to represent the Duke's head, although what exalted member of the aristocracy was thus distinguished it would be hard to say. Jones inclined to think it was the Duke of Wellington, but I upheld the theory that it was the Duke of Marlborough, chiefly basing my arguments on the fact that no artist who desired to convey a striking likeness would fail to show the great Duke in profile, whereas this personage was evidently depicted full face and wearing a 3-cornered hat. At the end of the village was the church, standing in an untidy churchyard, and opposite it was a neat little house, quite new, and of that utilitarian order of architecture which will stamp the Victorian age as one of the least imaginative of eras. 2 windows flanked the front door, and 3 narrow windows looked out overhead from under a slate roof. Variety excuse me. Let's try that again. Variety and distinction being given to the facade by the brilliant blending of the yellow bricks with red, so bright as to suggest the idea of their having been painted. The scrupulously clean stone at the front door, together with the bright green of the little palings and woodwork, told me what sort of landlady to expect, and I was not disappointed. A kindly-featured woman, thin, cheery and active, received us, speaking in that encouraging tone of half-compassionate, half-proprietary patronage which I have observed so many women adopt towards lone beings of the opposite sex. "You will find it precious dull, old man," said Jones as we were eating our frugal dinner. "There's nothing for you to do, unless you care to try a shot at the duck over the mudflats. I shall be busy on and off nearly all tomorrow." As we talked, I could not help admiring the cheerful pluck with which Jones endured the terrible monotony of his life in this dreary place. His rector was said to be delicate, and in order to prolong a life, which, no doubt, he considered valuable to the church, he lived with his family either at Torquay or Cannes, in elegant idleness, quite unable to do any duty, but fully equal to enjoying the pleasant society of those charming places, and quite satisfied that he had done his duty when he sacrificed 1/10 of his income to provide for the spiritual needs of his parish. There was no squire in the place. No gentlefolk, as the rustics called them, lived nearer than 5 miles, and there was not a single being of his own class with whom poor Jones could associate. And yet he made no complaint. The nearest approach to one being the remark that the worst of it was so difficult, if not impossible, to be really understood. "The poor being so suspicious and ignorant, they look at everything from such a low standpoint. Enthusiasm and freshness sink so easily into formalism and listlessness." The next day, Finding that I really could be of no use, and feeling awkward and bored, as man always is when another is actively doing his duty, I went off to the marshes to see if I could get any sport. I took some sandwiches and a flask with me, not intending to return until dinner. After wandering about for some time, crossing dike after dike by treacherous rails more or less rotten, I found myself on the edge of a wide mere. I could see some duck out in the middle, and standing far out in the shallow water was a heron. They were all out of shot, and I saw I should do no good without a duck punt. I sat down on an old pile left on the top of the sea wall, which had been lately repaired. The duck looked very tempting, but I doubted if I should do much good in broad daylight, even if I had a duck punt. Without a duck gun. After sitting disconsolately for some time, I got up and wandered on. The dreariness of the scene was most depressing. Everything was brown and grey. Nothing broke the monotony of the wide-stretching mere. The whole scene gave me the impression of a straight line of interminable length, with a speck at the centre of it. That speck was myself. At last, as I turned an angle in the sea wall, I saw something lying above high water mark, which looked like a boat. Rejoiced to see any signs of humanity, I quickened my pace. It was a boat, and, better still, a duck punt. As I came nearer, I could see that she was old and very likely leaky, but here was a prospect of adventure, and I was not going to be readily daunted. On examination, the old craft seemed more watertight than I expected. At least, she held water very well. Arid if she kept it in, she must equally well keep it out. I turned her over to run the water out, and then, dragging the crazy old boat over the line of seaweed, launched her. But now a real difficulty met me. The paddles were nowhere to be seen. They had doubtless been taken away by the owner, and it would be little use searching for them. But a stout stick would do to punt her over the shallow water, and after some little search I found an old stake which would answer well. Excuse me. This was real luck. I had now some hope of bagging a few ducks. At any rate, I was afloat, and could explore the little islets which barely rose above the brown water. I might at least find some rabbits on them. I cautiously poled myself towards the black dots, but before I came within range, up rose first one, then another and another, like a string of beads, and the whole flight went, with outstretched necks and rapidly beating wings, away to my right, and seemed to pitch again beyond a low island some half-mile away. The heron had long ago taken himself off, so there was nothing to be done but pole across the mud in pursuit of the duck. I had not gone many yards when I found that I was going much faster than I expected, and soon saw the cause. The tide was falling, and I was being carried along with it. This would bring me nearer to my ducks, and I lazily guided the punt with the stake. On rounding the island, I found a new source of interest. The mere opened out to a much larger extent, and away towards my right I could see a break in the low land, as if a wide ditch had been cut through. While in this opening ever and anon dark objects rose up and disappeared again in a way I could not account for. The water seemed to be running off the mud flats, and I saw that if I did not wish to be left high, but not dry on the long slimy wastes, I must be careful to keep in the little channels or lakes, which acted as natural drains to the acres of greasy mud. A conspicuous object attracted my attention some mile or more towards the opening in the land. It was a vessel lying high up on the mud, and looking as if she was abandoned. The ducks had pitched 100 yards or so beyond the island, and I approached as cautiously as I could. But just as I was putting down the stake to take up my gun, there was a swift sound of beating wings and splashing water, and away my birds flew, low over the mud, towards the old hulk. Here was a chance, I thought. If I could get on board and remain hidden, I might, by patiently waiting, get a shot. I looked at my watch. There was still plenty of daylight left, and the tide was only just beginning to leave the mud. I punted away, therefore, with renewed hope, and was not long in getting up to the old ship. There was just sufficient water over the mud to allow me to approach within 10 or 12 feet, but further I could not push the punt. This was disappointing. However, I noticed a deep lake ran round the other side, and determined to try my luck there. So, with a slosh and a heave, I got the flat afloat again, and made for the deeper water. It turned out quite successful, and I was enabled to get right under the square overhanging counter, while a little lane of water led alongside her starboard quarter. I pushed the nose of the punt into this, and was not long in clambering on board by the rusty irons of her forechains. The old vessel lay nearly upright in the soft mud, and a glance soon told me she would never be used again. Her gear and rigging were all rotten, and everything valuable had been removed. She was a brig of some 200 tons, and had been a fine vessel, no doubt. To me, there is always a world of romance in a deserted ship. The places she has been to, the scenes she has witnessed, the possibilities of crime or adventure, all these thoughts crowd upon me when I see an old hulk lying deserted and forgotten, left to rot upon the mud of some lonely creek. In order to keep my punt afloat as long as possible, I towed her round and moored her under the stern, and then looked over the bulwarks for the duck. There they were, swimming not more than 150 yards away, and they were coming towards me. I remained perfectly concealed under the high bulwark, and could see them paddling and feeding in the greasy weed. Their approach was slow, but I could afford to wait. Nearer and nearer they came. Another minute, and they would be well within shot. I was already congratulating myself upon the success of my adventure, and thinking of the joy of Jones at this large accession to his larder, when suddenly there was a heavy splash, and with a wild spluttering rush the whole pack rose out of the water and went skimming over the mud towards the distant sea. I let off both barrels after them, and tried to console myself by thinking that I saw the feathers fly from one, but not a bird dropped, and I was left alone in my chagrin. What could have caused the splash, that luckless splash, I wondered. There was surely no one else on board the ship, and certainly no one could get out here without mud patterns or a boat. I looked round. All was perfectly still. Nothing broke the monotony of the grey scene, sodden and damp and lifeless. A chill breeze came up from the southwest, bringing with it a raw mist which was blotting out the dark distance, and fast limiting my horizon. The day was drawing in, and I must be thinking of going home. As I turned round, my attention was arrested by seeing a duck punt glide past me in the now rapidly falling water, which was swirling by the mud bank on which the vessel lay. But there was no one in her. A dreadful thought struck me. It must be my boat, and how shall I get home? I ran to the stern and looked over. The duck punt was gone. The frayed and stranded end of the painter told me how it had happened. I had not allowed for the fall of the tide, and the strain of the punt, as the water fell away, had snapped the line, old and rotten as it was. I ran to the bows, and jumping onto the bitts, saw my punt peacefully drifting away, some quarter of a mile off. It was perfectly evident I could not hope to get her again. It was beginning to rain steadily. I could see that I was in for dirty weather, and became a little anxious about how I was to get back, especially as it was now rapidly growing dark. So thick was it that I could not see the low land anywhere, and could only judge of its position by remembering that the stern of the vessel pointed that way. The conviction grew upon me that I could not possibly get away from this doleful old hulk without assistance, and how to get it I could not for the life of me see. I had not seen a sign of a human being the whole day. It was not likely any more would be about at night. However, I shouted as loud as I could, and then waited to hear if there was any response. There was not a sound. Only the wind moaned slightly through the stumps of the masts, and something creaked in the cabin. Well, I thought, at least it might be worse. I shall have shelter for the night, while had I been left on one of these islands I should have had to spend the night exposed to the pelting rain. Happy thought. Go below before it gets too dark, and see what sort of a berth can be got, if the worst comes to the worst. So thinking, I went to the booby hatch, and found, as I expected, that it was half broken open, and anyone could go below who liked. As I stepped down the rotting companion, the air smelt foul and dank. I went below very cautiously, for I was not at all sure that the boards would bear me. It was fortunate I did so, for as I stepped off the lowest step, the floor gave way under my foot, and had I not been holding on to the stair rail, I should have fallen through. Before going any further, I took a look around. The prospect was not inviting. The light was dim. I could scarcely make out objects near me. All else was obscurity. I could see that the whole of the inside of the vessel was completely gutted. What little light there was came through the stern ports. A small round speck of light looked at me out of the darkness ahead, and I could see that the flooring had either all given way or been taken out of her. At my feet, a gleam of water showed me what to expect if I should slip through the floor joists. Altogether, a more desolate, gloomy, ghostly place it would be difficult to find. I could not see any bunk or locker where I could sit down, and everything movable had been taken out of the hulk. Groping my way with increasing caution, I stepped across the joists and felt along the side of the cabin. I soon came to a bulkhead. Continuing to grope, I came to an opening. If the cabin was dim, here was blackness itself. I felt it would be useless to attempt to go further, especially as a very damp, foul odour came up from the bilge water in her hold. As I stood looking into the darkness, a cold, chilly shudder passed over me, and with a shiver I turned round to look at the cabin. My eyes had now become used to the gloom. A deeper patch of darkness on my right suggested the possibility of a berth, and groping my way over to it, I found the lower bunk was still entire. Here, at least, I could rest, if I found it impossible to get to shore. Having some wax vestas in my pocket, I struck a light and examined the bunk. It was better than I expected. If I could only find something to burn, I should be comparatively cheerful. Before reconciling myself to my uncomfortable position, I resolved to see whether I could not get to the shore, and went up the rickety stairs again. It was raining hard, and the wind had got up. Nothing could be more dismal. I looked over the side and lowered myself down from the main chains to see if it were possible to walk over the mud. I found I could not reach the mud at all, and fearful of being unable to climb back if I let go, I clambered up the side again and got on board. It was quite clean. I must pass the night here. Before going below, I once more shouted at the top of my voice, more to keep up my own spirits than with any hope of being heard, and then paused to listen. Not a sound of any sort replied. I now prepared to make myself as comfortable as I could. It was a dreary prospect. I would rather have spent the night on deck than down below in that foul cabin, but the drenching, driving rain, as well as the cold, drove me to seek shelter below. It seemed so absurd to be in the position of a shipwrecked sailor, within 2 or 3 miles of a prosy country hamlet, and in a landlocked harbour while actually on land, if the slimy deep mud could be called land. I had not any matches left, but I had my gun and cartridges. The idea occurred to me to fire off minute guns. That's what I ought to do, of course. The red flash will be seen in this dark night, for it was dark now and no mistake. Getting up onto the highest part of the vessel, I blazed away. The noise sounded to me deafening. Surely the whole countryside would be aroused. After firing off a dozen cartridges, I waited. But the silence only seemed the more oppressive, and the blackness all the darker. It's no good. I'll turn in, I thought dejectedly. With great difficulty, I groped my way to the top of the companion ladder and bumped dismally down the steps. If only I had a light, I should be fairly comfortable, I thought. Happy thought, make a spit devil, as we used, when boys, to call the little cone of damp gunpowder. I got out my last 2 cartridges, and emptying the powder carefully into my hand, I moistened it, and worked it up into a paste. I then placed it on the smooth end of the rail and lighted it. This was brilliant, at least so it seemed by contrast with the absolute blackness around me. By its light I was able to find my way to the bunk, and it lasted just long enough for me to arrange myself fairly comfortably for the night. By contriving a succession of matches, I was enabled to have enough light to see to eat my frugal supper, for I had kept a little sherry and a few sandwiches to meet emergencies, and it was a fortunate thing I had. The light and the food made me feel more cheery, and by the time the last match had gone out, I felt worse might have happened to me by a long way. As I lay still, waiting for sleep to come, the absurdity of the situation forced itself upon me. Here was I, to all intents and purposes as much cut off from all communication with the rest of the world as if I were cast away upon a desert island. The chances were that I should make some one see or hear me the next day. Jones would be certain to have the country searched, and at the longest I should only endure the discomfort of one night, and get well laughed at for my pains. But meanwhile, I was absolutely severed from all human contact, and was as isolated as Robinson Crusoe, only more so, for I had no other living thing whatever to share my solitude. The silence of the place was perfect, and if silence can woo sleep, sleep ought to very soon have come. But when one is hungry and wet and in a strange, uncanny kind of place, besides being in one's clothes, it is a very difficult thing to go to sleep. First, my head was too low. Then, after resting it on my arms, I got cramp in them. My back seemed all over bumps, and when I turned on my side I appeared to have got a rather serious enlargement of the hip joint, and I found my damp clothes smell very musty. After sighing and groaning for some time, I sat up for change of position, and nearly fractured my skull in so doing, against the remains of what had once been a berth above me. I didn't dare to move in the inky blackness, for I had seen sufficient to know that I might very easily break my leg or my neck in the floorless cabin. There was nothing for it but to sit still or lie down and wait for daylight. I had no means of telling the time. When I had last looked at my watch, before the last match had gone out, it was not more than 6 o'clock. It might be now about 8, or perhaps not so late. Fancy 12 long hours spent in that doleful black place, with nothing in the world to do to pass away the time. I must go to sleep, and so full of this resolve, I lay down again. I suppose I went to sleep. All I can recollect, after lying down, is keeping my mind resolutely turned inwards, as it were, and fixed upon the arduous business of counting an imaginary and interminable flock of sheep pass one by one through an ideal gate. This meritorious method of compelling sleep had, no doubt, been rewarded, but I have no means of knowing how long I slept, and I cannot tell at what hour of the night the following strange circumstances occurred, for occur they certainly did, and I am as perfectly convinced that I was the oral witness to some ghastly crime as I am that I am writing these lines. I have little doubt I shall be laughed at, as Jones laughed at me, be told that I was dreaming, that I was overtired and nervous. In fact, so accustomed have I become to this sort of thing that I now hardly ever tell my tale. Or, if I do, I put it in the third person, and then I find people believe it, or at least take much more interest in it. I suppose the reason is that people cannot bring themselves to think so strange a thing could have happened to such a prosy, everyday sort of man as myself, and they cannot divest their minds of the idea that I am, well, to put it mildly, drawing on my imagination for facts. Perhaps, if the tale appears in print, it will be believed, as a facetious friend of mine once said to a newly married couple who had just seen the announcement of their marriage in the Times, "Oh, didn't know you were married till you saw it in print." Well, be the time what it may have been, all I know is that the next thing I can remember after getting my 500th sheep through the gate is that I heard 2 most horrible yells ring through the darkness. I sat bolt upright, and, as a proof that my senses were all there, I did not bring my head this time against the berth overhead, remembering to bend it outwards so as to clear it. There was not another sound. The silence was as absolute as the darkness. I must be dreaming, I thought, but the sounds were ringing in my ears and my heart was beating with excitement. There must have been some reason for this. I never was taken this way before. I could not make it out, and felt very uncomfortable. I sat there, listening for some time. No other sound breaking the deathly stillness, and becoming tired of sitting, I lay down again. Once more I set myself to get my interminable flocks through that gate, but I could not help myself listening. There seemed to me a sound growing in the darkness, a something gathering in the particles of the air, as if molecules of the atmosphere were rustling together, and with stilly movement were whispering something. The wind had died down, and I would have gone on deck if I could move, but it was hazardous enough moving about in the light. It would have been madness to attempt to move in that blackness. And so I lay still and tried to sleep. But now there was a sound, indistinct, but no mere fancy. A muffled sound, as of some movement in the forepart of the ship. I listened intently and gazed into the darkness. What was the sound? It did not seem like rats. It was a dull, shuffling kind of noise, very indistinct, and conveying no clue whatever as to its cause. It lasted only for a short time, but now the cold, damp air seemed to have become more piercingly chilly. The raw iciness seemed to strike into the very marrow of my bones, and my teeth chattered. At the same time, a new sense seemed to be assailed. The foul odour which I had noticed arising from the stagnant water in the bilge appeared to rise into more objectionable prominence, as if it had been stirred. "I cannot stand this," I muttered, shivering in horrible aversion at the disgusting odour. "I will go on deck at all hazards." Rising to put this resolve in execution, I was arrested by the noise beginning again. I listened. This time I distinctly distinguished two separate sounds. One, a heavy, soft weight being dragged along with difficulty. The other, like the hard sound of boots on boards. Could there be others on board after all? If so, why had they made no sound when I clambered on deck, or afterwards, when I shouted and fired my gun? Clearly, if there were people, they wished to remain concealed, and my presence was inconvenient to them. But how absolutely still and quiet they had kept. It appeared incredible that there should be any one. I listened intently. The sound had ceased again, and once more the most absolute stillness reigned around. A gentle swishing, wobbling, lapping noise seemed to form itself in the darkness. It increased until I recognized the chattering and bubbling of water. It must be the tide which is rising, I thought. It has reached the rudder and is eddying around the sternpost. This also accounted, in my mind, for the other noises, because as the tide surrounded the vessel, and thus she became waterborne, all kinds of sounds might be produced in the old hulk as she resumed her upright position. However, I could not get rid of the chilly, horrid feeling those two screams had produced, combined with the disgusting smell, which was getting more and more obtrusive. It was foul, horrible, revolting, like some carrion, putrid and noxious. I prepared to take my chances of damage and rose up to grope my way to the companion ladder. It was a more difficult job than I had any idea of. I had my gun, it was true, and with it I could feel for the joists, but when once I let go of the edge of the bunk, I had nothing to steady me, and nearly went headlong at the first step. Fortunately, I reached back in time to prevent my fall, but this attempt convinced me that I had better endure the strange horrors of the unknown than the certain miseries of a broken leg or neck. I sat down, therefore, on the bunk. Now that my own movements had ceased, I became aware that the shuffling noise was going on all the time. Well, I thought, they may shuffle. They won't hurt me, and I shall go to sleep again. So reflecting, I lay down, holding my gun, ready to use as a club if necessary. Now, it is all very well to laugh at superstitious terrors. Nothing is easier than to obtain a cheap reputation for brilliancy, independence of thought, and courage by deriding the fear of the supernatural when comfortably seated in a drawing-room well lighted and with company. But put those scoffers in a like situation with mine, and I don't believe they would have been any more free from a feeling the reverse of bold, mocking, and comfortable than I was. I had read the most powerful ghost story, The Haunted and the Haunters by the late Lord Lytton, and the vividness of that weird tale had always impressed me greatly. Was I actually now to experience, in my own person and with no possibility of escape, the trying ordeal that bold ghost hunter went through, under much more favourable circumstances? He, at least, had his servant with him. He had fuel and a light, and above all he could get away when he wanted to. I felt I could face any number of spiritual manifestations, if only I had warmth and light. But the icy coldness of the air was eating into my bones, and I shivered until my teeth chattered. I could not get to sleep. I could not prevent myself listening, and at last I gave up the contest and let myself listen. But there seemed now nothing to listen to. All the time I had been refusing to let my ears do their office by putting a handkerchief over one ear and lying on my arm with the other. A confused noise appeared to reach me, but the moment I turned round and lay on my back, everything seemed quiet. It's only my fancy, after all, the result of cold and want of a good dinner. I will go to sleep. But in spite of this, I lay still, listening a little longer. There was the sound of trickling water against the broad bilge of the old hulk, and I knew the tide was rising fast. My thoughts turned to the lost canoe, and to reproaching myself with my stupidity in not allowing enough rope, or looking at it more carefully. Suddenly, I became all attention again. An entirely different sound now arrested me. It was distinctly a low groan, and followed almost immediately by heavy blows, blows which fell on a soft substance, and then more groans, and again those sickening blows. There must be men here. Where are they? And what is it? I sat up and strained my eyes towards where the sound came from. The sound had ceased again. Should I call out, and let the man or men know that I was here? What puzzled me was the absolute darkness. How could anyone see to hit an object, or do anything else in this dense obscurity? It appalled me. Anything might pass at an inch's distance, and I could not tell who or what it was. But how could anything human find its way about, and more than I could? Perhaps there was a solid bulkhead dividing the forecastle from me. But I would have been very sound. But it would have been very sound, with no chink whatever, to prevent a gleam or a ray of light finding its way out somewhere. I could not help feeling convinced that the whole hull was open from one end to the other. Was I really dreaming after all? To convince myself that I was wide awake, I felt in my pockets for my notebook, and pulling out my pencil, I opened the book, and holding it in my left hand, wrote as well as I could by feel alone, "I am wide awake. It is about midnight, Christmas Eve, 1879. I found I had got to the bottom of the page, so I shut the book up, resolving to look at it next morning. I felt curious to see what the writing looked like by daylight. But all further speculation was cut short by the shuffling and dragging noise beginning again. There was no doubt the sounds were louder and were coming my way. I never in all my life felt so uncomfortable. I may as well at once confess it, so frightened. There, in that empty hull, over that boardless floor, over these rotting joists, somebody or something was dragging some heavy weight. What? I could form no conjecture. Only the shrieks, the blows, the groans, the dull thumping sounds compelled me to suspect the worst, to feel convinced that I was actually within some few feet of a horrible murder then being committed. I could form no idea of who the victim was or who was the assassin. That I actually heard the sounds, I had no doubt. That they were growing louder and more distinct, I felt painfully aware. The horror of the situation was intense. If only I could strike a light and see what was passing close there. But I had no matches. I could hear a sound as of someone breathing slowly, stertorously, then a dull groan, and once more the cruel, sodden blows fell again, followed by a drip, drip, and heavy drop in the dank water below, from which the sickening smell rose, pungent, reeking, horrible. The dragging, shuffling noise now began again. It came quite close to me, so close that I felt I had only to put out my hand to touch the thing. Good heavens! Was it coming to my bunk? The thing passed, and all the time the dull drip, as of some heavy drops, fell into the water below. It was awful. All this time I was sitting up and holding my gun by its barrel, ready to use it if I were attacked. As the sound passed me in the closest, I put out the gun involuntarily. But it touched nothing, and I shuddered at the thought that there was no floor over which the weight could be drawn. I must be dreaming some terribly vivid dream. It could not be real. I pinched myself. I felt I was pinching myself. It was no dream. The sweat poured off my brow. My teeth chattered with the cold. It was terrific in its dreadful mystery. And now the sounds altered. The noises had reached the companion ladder. Something was climbing them with difficulty. The old stairs creaked. Bump, thump. The thing was dragged up the steps with many pauses, and at last it seemed to have reached the deck. A long pause now followed. The silence grew dense around. I dreaded the stillness, the silence that made itself be heard almost more than the sounds. What new horror would that awful quiet bring forth? What terror was still brooding in the depths of that clinging darkness? Darkness that could be felt. The absolute silence was broken, horribly broken, by a dull drip from the stairs, and then the dragging began again. Distant and less distinct, but the steps were louder. They came nearer, over my head, as the old boards creaked, and the weight was dragged right over me. I could hear it above my head, but the steps stopped, and two distinct raps, followed by a third heavier one, sounded so clearly above me that it seemed almost as if it was something striking the rotten woodwork of the berth over my head. The sounds were horribly suggestive of the elbows and head of a body being dropped on the deck. And now, as if the horrors had not been enough, a fresh ghastliness was added. So close were the raps above me that I involuntarily moved, as if I had been struck by what caused them. As I did so, I felt something drop onto my head and slowly trickle over my forehead. It was too horrible. I sprang up in my disgust, and with a wild cry I stepped forward, and instantly fell between the joists into the rank water below. The shock was acute. Had I been asleep and dreaming before, this must inevitably have roused me up. I found myself completely immersed in water and, for a moment, was absolutely incapable of thinking. As it was pitch dark and my head had gone under, I could not tell whether I was above water or not, as I felt the bottom and struggled and splashed onto my legs. It was only by degrees I knew I must be standing with my head out of the foul mixture, because I was able to breathe easily, although the wet running down from my hair dribbled into my mouth as I stood shivering and gasping. It was astonishing how a physical discomfort overcame a mental terror. Nothing could be more miserable than my present position, and my efforts were at once directed to getting out of this dreadful place. But let any one who has ever had the ill luck to fall out of bed in his boyhood try and recollect his sensations. The bewildering realization that he is not in bed, that he does not know where he is, which way to go, or what to do to get back again. Everything he touches seems strange, and one piece of furniture much the same as any other. I well remember such an incident, and how, having rolled under the bed before I was wide awake, I could not for the life of me understand why I could not get up, and what it was that kept me down. I had not the least idea which way to get out, and kept going round and round in a circle under my bed for a long time, and should probably have been doing it until daylight, had not my sighs and groans awoke my brother, who slept in the same room, and who came to my help. If, then, one is so utterly at fault in a room, every inch of which one knows intimately, how much more hopeless was my position at the bottom of this old vessel, half immersed in water, and totally without any clue which could help me to get out. I had not the least idea which was the ship's stern or which her stem, and every movement I made with my feet only served to unsteady me, as the bottom was all covered with slime, and uneven with the great timbers of the vessel. My first thought on recovering my wits was to stretch my arms up over my head, and I was relieved to find that I could easily reach the joists above me. I was always fairly good at gymnastics, and I had not much difficulty in drawing myself up and sitting on the joist, although the weight of my wet clothes added to my exertions considerably. Having so far succeeded, I sat and drained, as it were, into the water below. The smell was abominable. I never disliked myself so much, and I shivered with cold. As I could not get any wetter, I determined to go on deck somehow. But where was the companion ladder? I had nothing to guide me. Strange to say, the reality of my struggles had always made me forget the mysterious phenomena I had been listening to. But now, as I looked round, my attention was caught by a luminous patch which quivered and flickered on my right, at what distance from me I could not tell. It was like the light from a glowworm, only larger and changing in shape, sometimes elongated like a lambent oval, and then it would sway one way or another as if caught in a draught of air. While I was looking at it and wondering what could cause it, I heard the steps over my head. They passed above me, and then seemed to grow louder on my left. A creeping dread again came over me. If only I could get out of this horrible place. But where were the stairs? I listened. The footfall seemed to be coming down some steps. Then the companion ladder must be on my left. But if I moved that way, I should meet the thing, whatever it was, that was coming down. I shuddered at the thought. However, I made up my mind. Stretching out my hand very carefully, I felt for the next joist, reached it, and crawled across. I stopped to listen. The steps were coming nearer. My hearing had now become acute. I could almost tell the exact place of each footfall. It came closer, closer, quite close, surely, on the very joist on which I was sitting. I thought I could feel the joist quiver, and involuntarily moved my hand to prevent the heavy tread falling on it. The steps passed on, grew fainter, and ceased, as they drew near the pale lambent light. One thing I noticed with curious horror, and that was that although the thing must have passed between me and the light, yet it was never for a moment obscured. Oops, I just bonked the mic, apologies. It was never for a moment obscured, which it must have been had any body or substance passed between, and yet I was certain that the steps went directly from me to it. It was all horribly mysterious, and what had become of the other sound? The thing that was being dragged. An irresistible shudder passed over me, but I determined to pursue my way until I came to something. It would never do to sit still and shiver there. After many narrow escapes of falling again, I reached a bulkhead, and cautiously feeling along it, I came to an opening. It was the companion ladder. By this time my hands, by feeling over the joists, had become dry again. I felt along the step to be quite sure that it was the stairs, and in doing so I touched something wet, sticky, clammy. Oh, horror! What was it? A cold shiver shook me nearly off the joist, and I felt an unutterable sense of repulsion to going on. However, the fresher air which came down the companion revived me, and, conquering my dread, I clambered on to the step. It did not take long to get upstairs and stand on the deck again. I think I never in all my life experienced such a sense of joy as I did on being out of that disgusting hole. It was true I was soaking wet, and the night wind cut through me like a knife, but these were things I could understand, and were matter of common experience. What I had gone through might only be a question of nerves, and had no tangible or visible terror, but it was none the less very dreadful, and I would not go through such an experience again for worlds. As I stood, cowering under the lee of the bulwark, I looked round at the sky. There was a pale light, as if of daybreak away in the east, and it seemed as if all my troubles would be over with the dawn. It was bitterly cold. The wind had got round to the north, and I could faintly make out the low shore astern. While I stood shivering there, a cry came down the wind. At first I thought it was a seabird, but it sounded again. I felt sure it was a human voice. I sprang up onto the taffrail and shouted at the top of my lungs, then paused. The cry came down clearer and distinct. It was Jones's voice. Had he heard me? I waved my draggled pocket handkerchief and shouted again. In the silence which followed, I caught the words, "We are coming!" What joyful words! Never did a shipwrecked mariner on a lonely isle feel greater delight. My misery would soon be over. Anyhow, I should not have to wait long. Unfortunately, the tide was low and was still falling. Nothing but a boat could reach me, I thought, and to get a boat would take some time. I therefore stamped up and down the deck to get warm. But I had an instinctive aversion for the companion ladder and the deep shadows of the forepart of the vessel. As I turned round in my walk, I thought I saw something moving over the mud. I stopped. It was, undoubtedly, a figure coming towards me. A voice hailed me in gruff accents. "Steady ahoy! Be anyone aboard?" Was anyone aboard? What an absurd question, and here I had been shouting myself hoarse. However, I quickly reassured him, and then understood why my rescuer did not sink in the soft mud. He had mud pattens on. Coming up as close as he could, he shouted to me to keep clear, and then threw first one, then the other, clattering wooden board onto the deck. I found them, and under the instructions of my friend I did not take long in putting them on. The man was giving me directions as to how to manage, but I did not care how much wetter I got, and dropped over the side into the slime. Sliding and straddling, I managed to get up to my friend, and then together we skated, as it were, to the shore, although skating very little represents the awkward splashes and slips I made on my way to land. I found quite a little crowd awaiting me on the bank, but Jones, with ready consideration, hurried me off to a cart he had in lane near, and drove me home. I told him the chief points of the adventure on our way, but did not say anything of the curious noises. It is odd how shy a man feels at telling what he knows people will never believe. It was not until the evening of the next day that I began to tell him, and then only after I was fortified by an excellent dinner and some very good claret. Jones listened attentively. He was far too kindly and well-bred to laugh at me, but I could see he did not believe one word as to the reality of the occurrence. "Very strange. How remarkable. Quite extraordinary," he kept saying with evident interest. But I was sure he put it all down to my fatigue and disordered imagination. And so, to do him justice, has everybody else to whom I have told the tale since. The fact is, we cannot, in this prosaic age, believe in anything the least approaching the supernatural. Nor do I. But nevertheless, I am as certain as I am that I am writing these words, that the thing did really happen, and will happen again. May happen every night, for all I know, only I don't intend to try and put my belief to the test. I have a theory which, of course, will be laughed at, and as I am not in the least scientific, I cannot bolster it up by scientific arguments. It is this. As Mr. Edison has now discovered that by certain simple processes, human sounds can be reproduced at any future date, so accidentally, and owing to the combination of most curious coincidences, it might happen that the agonized cries of some suffering being, or the sounds made by one at a time when all other emotions are as nothing compared to the supreme sensations of one committing some awful crime, could be impressed on the atmosphere or surface of an enclosed building, which could be reproached by a current of air passing into that building under the same atmospheric conditions. This is the vague explanation I have given to myself. However, let the explanation what it may, however be the explanation what it may, the facts are as I have stated them. Let those laugh who did not experience them. To return to the end of the story, there were two things I pointed out to Jones as conclusive that I was not dreaming. One was my pocketbook. I showed it him, and the words were quite clear, only, of course, very straggling. This is a facsimile of the writing, but I cannot account for the date being 1837. I am wide awake. It is Christmas Eve, 1837. The other point was the horrible stains on my hands and clothes. A foul-smelling dark chocolate stain was on my hair, hands, and clothes. Jones said, of course, this was from the rust off the mouldering ironwork, some of which, no doubt, had trickled down, owing to the heavy rain, through the defective caulking of the deck. The fact is, there is nothing that an ingenious mind cannot explain, but the question is the explanation the right one? I could easily account for the phosphorescent light. The water was foul and stagnant, and it was no doubt caused by the same gases which produce the well-known ignis fatuus, or will-o'-the-wisp. We visited the ship, and I recovered my gun. There were the same stains on the deck as there were on my clothes, and curiously enough they went in a nearly straight line over the place where I lay, from the top of the companion to the starboard bulwark. We carefully examined the forepart of the ship. It was completely gutted, as the rest of her. Jones was glad to get on deck again, as the atmosphere was very unpleasant, and I had no wish to stay. At my request, Jones made every inquiry he could about the old hulk. Not much was elicited. It bore an evil name, and no one would go on board who could help it. So far it looked as if it were credited with being haunted. The owner, who had been the captain of her, had died about 3 years before. He bore an ill reputation, but as he had left his money to the most influential farmer in the district, the country people were unwilling to talk against him. I went with Jones to call on the farmer, and asked him point-blank if he had ever heard whether a murder had been committed on board the Lily. He stared at me, and then he laughed. Not as I know of, was all his answer, and I never got any nearer than that. I feel that this is all very unsatisfactory. I wish I could give some thrilling and sensational explanation. I am sorry I cannot. My imagination suggests many, as no doubt it will to each of my readers who possess that faculty. But I have only written this to tell the actual facts, not to add to our superabundant fiction. If ever I come across any details bearing upon the subject, I will not fail to communicate them at once. The vessel I found was the Lily of Goole, owned by one Master Gad Earwaker, and built in 1801. The end. So, lesson for us all, don't go out to shoot duck and get stuck on a spooky boat. Yeah. Very funny experience tuning in and out of the story, because every time you start paying attention again, this guy's going through some new bewildering problem. He is not having a good night. No. Experiencing so many textures. Yeah, just, it's an odd one, because it's like it's a very short passage of time described in excruciating detail, which kind of reflects, not having myself been stuck on a spooky boat, but like those kinds of nights where I just need to sleep, and I cannot. I am unable to sleep, and just, frankly, the slow drip of the passage of time that you are excruciatingly aware of in those conditions. Even just that is, yeah. Don't shoot at ducks, they'll call their ghost friends to teach you a lesson. Yeah, we could learn that. I do love some of the descriptions of things in this, the way, just like on the opening page, the second paragraph, is, as we drove along the straight country lane from the little wayside station, it forcibly struck me that life in such a place must be dreary indeed. I have always been much influenced by local colour. Above all things, I am depressed by a dead level, and here was monotony with a vengeance. On each side of the low hedges, lichen-covered and wind-cropped, stretched bare fields, the absolute level of the horizon being only broken at intervals by some mournful tree that pointed like a decrepit finger-post towards the east, for all its western growth was nipped and blasted by the roaring southwest winds. An occasional dark black spot dotted against the grey distance marked a hayrick or labourer's cottage, while some 2 miles ahead of us the stunted spire of my friend's church stood out against the wintry sky, amid the withered branches of a few ragged trees. I love that scene setting. That's real good. And there's the other one, not a couple of pages later, where he's just talking about just this, like, having this image of, I think, just like a vast level, like, grey plain, almost sort of conjures up to mind like the image of like a sort of purgatory-like experience, and in the middle just this black speck, which is him. I'm like, ooh, yeah, that's some good vibes. That's some good setting. There you go. Yeah, the dreariness of the scene was most depressing. Everything was brown and grey. Nothing broke the monotony of the wide, stretching mere. The whole scene gave me the impression of a straight line of interminable length with a speck in the centre of it. That speck was myself. Like, there's some good bits in here. So yeah, I appreciate the vibes of that one. But we're going to take a break, and yeah, let's do the other story. It might recklessly run on longer than 2 hours, and as you can probably hear, my voice is still not recovered fully from the 6-hour walking around GTA 5 map stream that I did last week. He's just describing central Indiana in November. Okay, yeah, I mean, no, I love those vibes. These are very good vibes. It's like, me realizing when I went to Norfolk years ago, just because they don't have hedges in Norfolk. So they have ditches by fields instead of hedges, and so like you're driving along, you look across and like, oh, I can actually just see for miles. It's really weird to be able to do here, and honestly, I kind of love big, flat, empty, open spaces. It's very good. Yeah, we're gonna take a break. 5 minutes. We'll see you back here in 5 minutes, and we'll do another story, which will be The Shadow by Edith Nesbit, which I don't think I've read on stream. I have a problem with this book where when I got it, I started reading the stories in it in like early preparation for reading them on stream, and then I didn't read them on stream. And so I've completely forgotten. So like, I'm reading and going, yeah, no, I know the story. I've read this one, which usually means I've done it on stream. But I don't think I have. So, we'll see. But it's a good one. So we'll see you back here then. Bye for now. And we are back. Hello. Welcome back. Thanks. I hope everyone's had a, as good, useful / fulfilling, however, a break you need. And we're back for more. Will be in a minute when I start. The Shadow by Edith Nesbit, which I don't think we've read on here. Like, for one, it doesn't help that so many stories are things like the Shadow. That blog has footnotes. You love it. So I'm annoyed that I couldn't find either of these on Gutenberg. So I have one's links to a PDF, and the other's links to like a blog which has the story, I guess. But hey, look at that! If you click onto it, you actually get both footnotes and illustrations. So that's cool. I think. Yeah, I've not actually skimmed the version on the blog just to make sure that it is correct. Oh, just skim to the end. Yeah, looks like it is. Cool, great, okay, good. Because hey, here's your text. And looks at text. This isn't what you're reading, Sam. Oh no. We seem okay. So that's lovely to see. Yeah, I don't know. I could always just crack on with it. I guess it's 10:30 here, so we're probably going to run over time. But hey, I've missed so many streams lately. It would only be fitting to go on a little bit later. So if we're ready, if we're all some measure of back and assembled, and have broken and now mended, then I guess. Why do we not continue? Oh, actually, firstly, just going to pick some fluff and cat hair off the microphone because I don't want to inhale that while I'm reading. I'm sure you understand. I am not yet ready to fully transition into cat hair Georg. You have resumed, so you have returned, story can commence. Excellent, thank you for the permission. Right. Let me just squeak the mic arm while I reposition things and get myself fully settled. Yeah, my cozy winter reading position is great. It's like reclining back in the chair, feet up on the desk, blanket over me, even though Joey's just still asleep in his coop. If we're ready, Joey tries to help the noise by putting cat hair on the microphone. Yeah. I mean, somewhat barbarically, the big the big fluffy attachment that gets put on microphones when you're using them outside to sort of dampen wind noise is known as a dead cat. So, it stands to reason that, perhaps actual cat fluff from a real live, well and functional cat, and long may that continue, would also have a sound deadening effect on microphones. So, that's a fun bit of knowledge for anyone that just got jump scared by that didn't already know it. Yes, the cat cube persists. What? Such a helpful boy. Exactly. He's helping to keep the extra noise. He's keeping all the wind noise out of my. Well, no, it's not particularly sealed and isolated. This is it's double glazed, but it's sure the wind sure gets in. This is not a sealed room, but fortunately, it's not that blowy. Let's have a story. This particular story is called The Shadow by Edith Nesbit. This is not an artistically rounded off ghost story, and nothing is explained in it, and there seems to be no reason why any of it should have happened, but that is no reason why it should not be told. You must have noticed that all the real ghost stories you have ever come close to are like this in these respects. No explanation, No logical coherence. Here is the story. There were 3 of us, and another, but she had fainted suddenly at the second extra of the Christmas dance, and had been put to bed in the dressing room next to the room which we 3 shared. It had been one of those jolly, old-fashioned dances where nearly everybody stays the night, and the big country house is stretched to its utmost, containing guests harbouring on sofas, couches, settles, and even mattresses on the floors. Some of the young men actually, I believe, slept on the great dining table. We had talked of our partners, as girls will, and then the stillness of the manor house, broken only by the whisper of the wind in the cedar branches and the scraping of their harsh fingers against our window panes, had pricked us to such a luxurious confidence in our surroundings of bright chintz and candle flame and firelight that we had dared to talk of ghosts, in which we all said we did not believe one bit. We had told the story of the phantom coach, and the horribly strange bed, and the lady in the sack, and the house in Berkeley Square. We, none of us, believed in ghosts, but my heart at least seemed to leap to my throat and choke me there when a tap came to our door. A tap faint, not to be mistaken. "Who's there?" said the youngest of us, craning a lean neck towards the door. It opened slowly, and I give you my word the instant of suspense that followed is still reckoned among my life's least confident moments. Almost at once the door opened fully, and Miss Eastwich, my aunt's housekeeper, companion, and general stand-by, looked in on us. We all said, "Come in," but she stood there. She was, at all normal hours, the most silent woman I have ever known. She stood and looked at us, and shivered a little. So did we, for in those days corridors were not warmed by hot water pipes, and the air from the door was keen. "I saw your light," she said at last, "and I thought it was late for you to be up. After all this gaiety, I thought perhaps—" Her glance turns towards the door of the dressing-room. "No," I said, "she's fast asleep." I should have added a good night, but the youngest of us forestalled my speech. She did not know Miss Eastwich, as we others did not know how her persistent silence had built a wall round her, a wall that no one dared to break down with the commonplaces of talk or the littlenesses of mere human relationship. Miss Eastwich's silence had taught us to treat her as a machine, and as other than a machine we never dreamed of treating her. But the youngest of us had seen Miss Eastwich for the first time that day. She was young, crude, ill-balanced, subject to blind, calf-like impulses. She was also the heiress of a rich tallow chandler, but that has nothing to do with this part of the story. She jumped up from the hearthrug, her unsuitably rich silk lace-trimmed dressing gown falling back from her thin collarbones, and ran to the door and put an arm round Miss Eastwich's prim, lace-encircled neck. I gasped. I should as soon have dared to embrace Cleopatra's Needle. "Come in," said the youngest of us. "Come and get warm. There's lots of cocoa left." She drew Miss Eastwich in and shut the door. The vivid light of pleasure in the housekeeper's pale eyes went through my heart like a knife. It would have been so easy to put an arm round her neck, if one had only thought she wanted an arm there. But it was not I who had thought that, and indeed my arm might not have brought the light evoked by the thin arm of the youngest of us. "Now," the youngest went on eagerly, "you shall have the very biggest, nicest chair, and the cocoa pots here on the hob as hot, and we've all been telling ghost stories, and we don't believe in them a bit, and when you get warm you ought to tell one too." Miss Eastwich, that model of decorum and decently done duties, tell a ghost story. "You're sure I'm not in your way?" Miss Eastwich said, stretching her hands to the blaze. I wondered whether housekeepers have fires in their rooms even at Christmas time. "Not a bit." I said it, And I hope I said it as warmly as I felt it. Miss Eastwich, I'd have asked for you to come in other times, only I didn't think you'd care for girls' chatter. The third girl, who was really of no account, and that's why I have not said anything about her before, poured cocoa for our guest. I put my fleecy Madeira shawl round her shoulders. I could not think of anything else to do for her, and I found myself wishing desperately to do something. The smiles she gave us were quite pretty. People can smile prettily at 40 or 50 or even later, though girls don't realize this. It occurred to me, and this was another knife thrust, that I had never seen Miss Eastwich smile, a real smile, before. The pale smiles of dutiful acquiescence were not the same blood as this dimpling, happy, transfiguring look. "This is very pleasant," she said, and it seemed to me that I had never before heard her real voice. It did not please me to think that at the cost of cocoa, of fire, and my arm round her neck I might have heard this new voice any time these 6 years. "We've all been telling ghost stories," I said. "The worst of it is we don't believe in ghosts. No one knows has ever seen one. It's always what somebody told somebody and who told somebody, you know," said the youngest of us. "And you can't believe that, can you?" "What the soldier said is not evidence," said Miss Eastwich. Will it be believed that little Dickens' quotation pierced one more keenly than the new smile or the new voice? And all the ghost stories are so beautifully rounded off. A murder committed on the spot, or a hidden treasure, or a warning. I think that makes them harder to believe. The most horrid ghost story I ever heard was one that was quite silly." "Tell it!" "I can't. It doesn't sound anything to tell. Miss Eastwich ought to tell one." "Oh, do!" said the youngest of us, and her salt cellars loomed dark as she stretched her neck eagerly and laid an entreating arm on our guest's knee. "The only thing that I ever heard of was hearsay," she said slowly, "till just the end." I knew she would tell her story, and I knew she had never before told it, and I knew she was only telling it now because she was proud, and this seemed the only way to pay for the fire and the cocoa and the laying of that arm round her neck. "Don't tell it," I said suddenly. "I know you'd rather not." I dare say it would bore you," she said meekly, and the youngest of us, who, after all, did not understand everything, glared resentfully at me. "We should just love it," she said. "Do tell us. Never mind if it isn't a real, proper, fixed-up story. I'm certain anything you think ghostly would be quite too beautifully horrid for anything." Miss Eastwich finished her cocoa and reached up to set the cup on the mantelpiece. "Can't do any harm," she said to herself. "They don't believe in ghosts. And it wasn't exactly a ghost either. And they're all over 20, they're not babies." There was a breathing time of hush and expectancy. The fire crackled and the gas suddenly glared higher because the billiard lights had been put out. We heard the steps and voices of the men going along the corridors. "It is really hardly worth telling," Miss Eastwich said doubtfully, shading her faded face from the fire with her thin hand. We all said, "Go on! Oh, go on, do!" "Well," she said, 20 years ago, and more than that, I had 2 friends, and I loved them more than anything in the world. And they married each other." She paused, and I knew just in what way she had loved each of them. The youngest of us said, "How awfully nice for you! Do go on!" She patted the youngest's shoulder, and I was glad that I had understood, and that the youngest of all hadn't. She went on. "Well, after they were married, I did not see much of them for a year or two, and then he wrote and asked me to come and stay, because his wife was ill, and I should cheer her up, and cheer him up as well, for it was a gloomy house, and he, himself, was growing gloomy too." I knew, as she spoke, that she had every line of that letter by heart. Well, I went. The address was in Lee, near London. In those days there were streets and streets of new villa houses growing up round old brick mansions, standing in their own grounds, with red walls round, you know, and a sort of flavour of coaching days and post-chaises and Blackheath highwaymen about them. He had said the house was gloomy, and it was called the Firs, and I imagined my cab going through a dark, winding shrubbery, and drawing up in front of one of these sedate old square houses. Instead, we drew up in front of a large, smart villa with iron railings, gay and caustic tiles leading from the iron gate to the stained glass-panelled door, and for shrubbery only a few stunted cypresses and acubas in the tiny front garden. But inside it was all warm and welcoming. He met me at the door. She was gazing into the fire, and I knew she had forgotten us. But the youngest girl of all still thought it was to us she was telling her story. "He met me at the door," she said again, "and thanked me for coming and asked me to forgive the past." "What past?" said that high priestess of the inapropos, the youngest of all. "Oh, I suppose he meant because they hadn't invited me before, or something," said Miss Eastwich worriedly. "But it's a very dull story, I find, after all, and—" "Do go on," I said. Then I kicked the youngest of us, and got up to rearrange Miss Eastwich's shawl, and said, in a blatant dumb show over the shawled shoulder, "Shut up, you little idiot." After another silence, the housekeeper's new voice went on. "They were very glad to see me, and I was very glad to be there. You girls now have such troops of friends, but these two were all I had, all I ever had. Mabel wasn't exactly ill, only weak and excitable. I thought he seemed more ill than she did. She went to bed early, and before she went she asked me to keep him company through his last pipe. So we went into the dining room and sat in the 2 armchairs on each side of the fireplace. They were covered with green leather, I remember. There were bronze groups of horses and a black marble clock on the mantelpiece, all wedding presents. He poured out some whisky for himself, but he hardly touched it. He sat looking into the fire, and at last I said, "What's wrong? Mabel looks as well as you could expect." He said, "Yes, but I don't know from one day to the other that she won't begin to notice something wrong. That's why I wanted you to come. You are always so sensible and strong-minded, and Mabel's like a little bird on a flower." I said, "Yes, of course," and waited for him to go on. I thought he must be in debt or in trouble of some sort, so I just waited. Presently he said, "Margaret, this is a very peculiar house." He always called me Margaret. You see, we'd been such old friends. I told him I thought the house was very pretty and fresh and homelike, only a little too new, but that fault would mend with time. He said, "It is new, that's just it. We're the first people who've ever lived in it. If it were an old house, Margaret, I should think it was haunted." I asked if he had seen anything. "No," he said. "Not yet." "Heard, then?" said I. "No, not heard either," he said. "But there's a sort of feeling." I can't describe it. I've seen nothing, and I've heard nothing, but I've been so near to seeing and hearing. Just near, that's all. And something follows me about. Only when I turn round, there's never anything, only my shadow, and I always feel that I shall see the thing next minute, but I never do. Not quite. It's always just not visible. I thought he'd been working rather hard and tried to cheer him up by making light of all this. It was just nerves, I said. Then he said he had thought I could help him. And did I think anyone he had wronged could have laid a curse on him? And did I believe in curses? I said I didn't, and the only person anyone could have said he had wronged forgave him freely. I knew, if there was anything to forgive. So I told him this too. It was I, not the youngest of us, who knew the name of that person, wronged and forgiving. So then, I said, he ought to take Mabel away from the house and have a complete change. But he said no. Mabel had got everything in order, and he could never manage to get her away just now without explaining everything. And above all, he said, she mustn't guess there's anything wrong. I dare say I shan't feel quite such a lunatic now you're here. So we said good night. Is that all the story? Said the third girl, striving to convey that, even as it stood, it was a good story. It's only the beginning, said Miss Eastwich. Whenever I was alone with him, he used to tell me the same thing over and over again, and at first, when I began to notice things, I tried to think that it was his talk that had upset my nerves. The odd thing was that it wasn't only at night, but in broad daylight, and particularly on the stairs and passages. On the staircase, the feeling used to be so awful that I have had to bite my lips till they bled to keep myself from running upstairs at full speed. Only I knew if I did, I should go mad at the top. There was always something behind me, exactly as he had said, something that one could just not see, and a sound that one could just not hear. There was a long corridor at the top of the house. I have sometimes almost seen something. You know how one sees things without looking. But if I turned round, it seemed as if the thing drooped and melted into my shadow. There was a little window at the end of the corridor. Downstairs there was another corridor, something like it, with a cupboard at one end and the kitchen at the other. One night I went down into the kitchen to heat some milk for Mabel. The servants had gone to bed. As I stood by the fire waiting for the milk to boil, I glanced through the open door and along the passage. I never could keep my eyes on what I was doing in that house. The cupboard door was partly open. They used to keep empty boxes and things in it. And as I looked, I knew that now it was not going to be almost any more. Yet I said, "Mabel?" Not because I thought it could be Mabel who was crouching down there, half in and half out of the cupboard. The thing was grey at first, and then it was black. And when I whispered, "Mabel," it seemed to sink down till it lay like a pool of ink on the floor, and then its edges drew in, and it seemed to flow like ink when you tilt up the paper you have spilt it on. And it flowed into the cupboard till it was all gathered into the shadow there. I saw it go quite plainly. The gas was full on in the kitchen. I screamed aloud, but even then I'm thankful to say I had enough sense to upset the boiling milk, so that when he came downstairs 3 steps at a time, I had the excuse for my scream of a scalded hand. The explanation satisfied Mabel. But the next night he said, "Why didn't you tell me? It was that cupboard. All the horror of the house comes out of that. Tell me, have you seen anything yet? Or is it only the nearly seeing and nearly hearing still?" I said, "You must tell me first what you've seen." He told me, and his eyes wandered as he spoke to the shadows by the curtains, and I turned up all 3 gas lights and lit the candles on the mantelpiece. Then we looked at each other and said we were both mad, and thanked God that Mabel was at least sane. For what he had seen was what I had seen. After that, I hated to be alone with a shadow, because at any moment I might see something that would crouch and sink and lie like a black pool, and then slowly draw itself into the shadow that was nearest. Often that shadow was my own. The thing came first at night, but afterwards there was no hour safe from it. I saw it at dawn and at noon, in the dusk and in the firelight, and always it crouched and sank, and was a pool that flowed into some shadow and became part of it. And always I saw it with the straining of the eyes, a pricking and aching. It seemed as though I could only just see it, as if my sight to see it had to be strained to the uttermost. And still the sound was in the house, the sound that I could just not hear. At last, one morning early, I did hear it. It was close behind me, and it was only a sigh. It was worse than the thing that crept into the shadows. I don't know how I bore it. I couldn't have borne it if I hadn't been so fond of them both. But I knew in my heart that, if he had no one to whom he could speak openly, he would go mad, or tell Mabel. His was not a very strong character, very sweet and kind and gentle, but not strong. He was always easily led. So I stayed on and bore up, and we were very cheerful and made little jokes and tried to be amusing when Mabel was with us. But when we were alone, we did not try to be amusing, and sometimes a day or two would go by without our seeing or hearing anything, and we should perhaps have fancied that we had fancied what we had seen and heard, only there was always the feeling of there being something about the house that one could just not hear and not see. Sometimes we used to try not to talk about it, but generally we talked of nothing else at all. And the weeks went by, and Mabel's baby was born. The nurse and the doctor said that both mother and child were doing well. He and I sat late in the dining room that night. We had neither of us seen or heard anything for 3 days. Our anxiety about Mabel was lessened. We talked of the future. It seemed then so much brighter than the past. We arranged that, the moment she was fit to be moved, he should take her away to the sea, and I should superintend the moving of their furniture into the new house he had already chosen. He was gayer than I had seen him since his marriage, almost like his old self. When I said good night to him, he said a lot of things about my having been a comfort to them both. I hadn't done anything much, of course, but I'm still glad he said them. Then I went upstairs, almost for the first time without the feeling of something following me. I listened at Mabel's door. Everything was quiet. I went on towards my own room, and in an instant I felt that there was something behind me. I turned. It was crouching there. It sank, and the black fluidness of it seemed to be sucked under the door of Mabel's room. I went back. I opened the door a listening inch. All was still. And then I heard a sigh close behind me. I opened the door and went in. The nurse and the baby were asleep. Mabel was asleep too. She looked so pretty, like a tired child. The baby was cuddled up into one of her arms and its tiny head against her side. I prayed, then, that Mabel might never know the terrors that he and I had known, that those little ears might never hear any but pretty sounds, those clear eyes never see any but pretty sights. I did not dare to pray for a long time after that, because my prayer was answered. He never saw. He never heard anything more in this world. And now I could do nothing more for him, or for her. When they had put her in her coffin, I lighted wax candles round her, and laid the horrible white flowers that people will send near her, and then I saw he had followed me. I took his hand to lead him away. At the door we both turned. It seemed to us that we heard a sigh. He would have sprung to her side, in I don't know what mad, glad hope. But at that instant we both saw it. Between us and the coffin, first grey, then black, it crouched an instant, then sank and liquefied, and was gathered together and drawn till it ran into the nearest shadow. And the nearest shadow was the shadow of Mabel's coffin. I left the next day. His mother came. She had never liked me. Miss Eastwich paused. I think she had quite forgotten us. "Didn't you see him again?" asked the youngest of us all. "Only once," Miss Eastwich answered, "and something black crouched then between him and me. But it was only his second wife crying beside his coffin." It's not a cheerful story, is it? And it doesn't lead anywhere. I've never told anyone else, and I think it was seeing his daughter that brought it all back. She looked towards the dressing-room door. "Mabel's baby?" "Yes, and exactly like Mabel, only with his eyes." The youngest of all had Miss Eastwich's hands and was petting them. Suddenly the woman wrenched her hands away and stood at her gaunt height, her hands clenched, eyes straining. She was looking at something that we could not see, and I know what the man in the Bible meant when he said, "The hair of my flesh stood up." What she saw seemed not quite to reach the height of the dressing-room door handle. Her eyes followed it down, down, widening and widening. Mine followed them. All the nerves of them seemed strained to the uttermost, and I almost saw, or did I quite see? I can't be certain, but we all heard the long-drawn, quivering sigh, and to each of us it seemed to be breathed just behind us. It was I who caught up the candle. It dripped all over my trembling hand, and was dragged by Miss Eastwich to the girl who had fainted during the second extra. But it was the youngest of all whose lean arms were round the housekeeper when we turned away, and that have been round her many a time since, in the new home where she keeps house for the youngest of us. The doctor who came in the morning said that Mabel's daughter had died of heart disease, which she had inherited from her mother. It was that had made her faint during the second extra. But I have sometimes wondered whether she may not have inherited something from her father. I have never been able to forget the look on her dead face. The end. Thank you for listening. Weird thing to say, but I like a sad story, and boy does that one deliver it. You're welcome. Thank you for listening. Yeah, I really like that one. Even just like the characters. I'm just gonna mute my mic for a sec while I adjust it. Yeah, just a good tragedy is very satisfying sometimes. Yeah, I just like the slow roll of the tragedy, like how, and even it does a nice little thing. It just sets it up right at the start, like, oh yeah, everyone was fine apart from, just one of them, one of the girls just like, collapsed, came over a bit faint during a dance. She's in the next room, that's fine. And it like drops that in at the start, and then we're just not going to refer back to it until we get to the end, and it's like, oh, it just suddenly dawns on you and you realise, oh wait, no, hang on, that's who she's talking about. And just I just like the gentle, sad pathos with which the character is written, who's Miss Eastwich. How, just like, oh, go on, tell us a ghost story. And she's like, well, okay, I'm going to tell you the one about my two very good friends who I loved both equally, who got married. And the girl's like, oh, that must have been very nice. And your, narrator who is like, yeah, that kid's an idiot. And I cannot read the room. And it's like, no, stop, please stop talking. And yeah, like there's almost those little, it's almost, well, no, not even almost, it is like little moments of levity, of just like slight, it's not like grim from the start, it just slightly lifts the mood a little bit when you just have these little interruptions from, someone who is not good at social cues, and frankly, as I can't judge, I've been that person in the past. And so yeah, it kind of breaks the tension a little bit just by doing that, and that then allows it to deliver some real sad notes as it goes, and that's my kind of good writing. I like that. So yeah, I really like that story. I think that's excellent. I enjoyed it tremendously. Now both times that I've read it, by which I mean once when reading it, preparation for the stream, and again on stream. I think actually, does this say, or is it on her Wikipedia page? Yeah, Edith Nesbit, married name Bland, was a groundbreaking children's author who led an unconventional life. In her late teens, she eloped with her fiance's colleague Hubert Bland and became pregnant. She married Bland, but he fathered children by at least 2 other women, one of whom was Nesbit's close friend Alice, who ended up living with them in a ménage à trois. Nesbit and Bland were also socialists and active in the Fabian Society, and she took the bohemian step of not wearing corsets and cutting her hair short. Which, again, I hell yeah, sounds great. Love this. Even, you want to be her when you grow up? Yeah, get looking for that polycule. Yeah, she sounds like a really fascinating person, and I feel like you can see that immediately in the story, and how that the perspectives that it's written from, and the attitudes that are there. It's like, oh right, yeah, you seem like a cool person, and I can get that from what you're saying here. Is good. I enjoyed, and it seems like you did too. So that's good. Everybody's happy. But yeah, this has brought us to the end of the stream, or if you're listening on YouTube, to the end of your video. So I'm going to a successful. Exactly. We, you know what? We got a successful stream, and we have spiked that one home like a volleyball player or something. I don't know. That's far too energetic for this. I'm gonna go. I'm not sure what the schedule will be for next week. I don't know. It is for sure that time of year when things are busy. I know at some point, maybe Monday, I don't know, we are planning to do one last literary showing our faces, talking about things. Whether that's this Monday or next, I'm not sure. Lucy will update the schedule on the Discord when she has it, I am confident. And otherwise, yeah, we will see you when we see you, which probably sometimes over the next week, hopefully, if all things go well. But yeah, for now, take care of yourselves, be well, have a good however much of the weekend you have left to you, and we will see you in the next one. Goodbye, and good night.